What is going on, everyone? Welcome back to the All Aussie Rules podcast. This is episode 9. We are previewing round 3 of the 2024 AFL season today. Welcome on in. It's been as Eddie used to say, big week in football. We have 8 matches going ahead this weekend. Two teams have the bye, both expansion clubs in GWS and Gold Coast, both having this week off. Easter weekend, traditional Easter weekend matches coming up. So coming up on this episode, we're going to start with a little bit of news from the football world. We'll run through my power rankings for this week, see how they've changed from last week. Have a preview of all the round 3 matchups, and then a final look at my tips for round 3. Hopefully we can do better than last week. No further ado, let's jump right into the latest news. So yesterday was the tribunal hearings. 2 metre Peter, he's been rubbed out for 4 weeks. I think a lot of people in the AFL world kind of expected it. I still think it's pretty rough to get 4 weeks for that. I think maybe a week would have been about right, but maybe 2. But anyway, I am not in the rules committee, so what would I know? Max King also got a week. I think he was a little bit unlucky as well, but at the same time, they've made it pretty clear. You hit the head, you're in trouble. So that's pretty much going to be what everyone has to focus on in AFL these days. Avoid the head at all costs. What else is news in this week? Big story coming out of the AFL at the moment with in regards to drug use and in particular Melbourne Football Club, based on what one of their old doctors has said. I'll be avoiding mostly that story. It's not, the word is football related, but we're focusing on football here certainly at the moment. So we will jump straight into my power rankings for heading into round 3. So we start with the bottom 10 teams. No change down the bottom. West Coast, I think, are clearly a league below the AFL at the moment. I personally think they'd probably struggle against most of the VFL. That's just where they're at the moment. North Melbourne, I think, are showing signs. To be honest, I almost put them above Hawthorn. The midfield for North Melbourne's looking good. They just need to work on a few things, but they, as I said at the start of the year, they're looking alright. They've got a lot of good young talent, so I think in the next 12 to 18 months you'll definitely see them rising up the ladder. Hawthorn haven't shown me anything to get excited about just yet, so they've stayed 16. Richmond have actually been competitive in rounds 1 and 2. Their opening round match wasn't very good though, so they're staying in 15th. Essendon were solid. They technically drop a spot, but that's mainly due to Western Bulldogs looking so good and this week and having to go up. Adelaide have had a rough start to the year. They've dropped back down. As I said, Bulldogs got a good win over Gold Coast last weekend, so they've jumped up to 12th. I've got that wrong way around. They were 14th last week, so ignore the bit that says 10th. They were not 10th last week, they were 14th. Gold Coast, they've dropped back 3 spots. They were very poor against the Bulldogs. Collingwood are in free fall at the moment. They've dropped from 1 at the start of the year down to 10 in a few weeks. That's crazy. Don't write them off completely. They probably lose again this week, but they showed last year that they can win a lot of games in a row. It's the same team, so they've certainly put some pressure on themselves, but I wouldn't write them off just yet. Fremantle have looked very good. They've moved up into 9th. And then if we look at the top 8, Geelong, they're 2-0 now, so they've got no reason not to be in the top 8 of the best 8 teams. They're looking alright. St Kilda, they're only 1-1, but they only lost to Geelong narrowly at the Cattery, so they are sitting 7th. Brisbane didn't play, so technically it's hard to see how they went up a spot, but I just don't think I could put St Kilda or Geelong above them just yet. So they're in 6th. Port Adelaide were very good, they're 5th. I want to see them against competitive teams first before I get too excited about them. Carlton didn't play, they only dropped because Melbourne were very good. And then top 2 stayed the same. GWS, who have the bye this week, and Sydney were solid against Essendon without doing enough to jump up to number 1. From there, we will have a look at the round 3 matchups. First up, we have the traditional Thursday night, Easter Thursday game up at the Gabba, Brisbane versus Collingwood. Leading into the season, this would have been expected to be a blockbuster. I mean, technically it still is, but possibly for different reasons, with neither team getting a win on the board yet. Brisbane obviously having the bye last week. They will have rested and regrouped and be ready to go, you would imagine. But they're 0-2, and Collingwood in even worse shape are 0-3 going into this one. Brisbane will be going in as favourites. They won in the Easter Thursday game last year reasonably comfortably. Collingwood kicked poorly, but Brisbane were probably the better team. Brisbane also won the game at Marvel in around round 21, I think it was. They won that comfortably. Collingwood did have a few injuries at that point of the season, though, so I wouldn't be too reading into that. And then obviously Collingwood got up in the grand final narrowly by 4 points. Obviously a massive game for both teams. Brisbane will be going in as favourites, comfortable favourites as well, and rightly so. Brisbane have been fast starters this year. They're 2-0 in first quarters, but then in the second and third quarter they're 0-4. So they jumped the gate and then they just have struggled to put that into effect for the following couple quarters. So that's probably their main downfall at the moment. They've been winning inside 50s both matches they've played and lost them both. So a little bit more efficiency going forward will definitely see them improve, I think. Collingwood, the main spot that they're losing games in a lot of ways, but their third quarters just aren't good enough. Their 3 weeks they've lost by 21, 23 and 28 in third quarters, so they're just getting blown out of the water in the straight out of half time. And when you look at it, they've lost the games by like 30, 30 and 15, so you take out the third quarters and it's 1 win and 2 5, 10 point losses. So that's probably the main area they'll be looking to improve. They're just turning it over too much. They need to work on their disposal, I think, a little bit. But we'll see how that goes for them going into round 4 in round 3, their 4th match, which is a massive game for them. So that's Thursday night football. We then have some good Friday football. We have 2 games. First up at 4:20 p.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Time. We're nearly done with daylight savings, just as a side note, so we'll be heading to the same time as Queensland soon enough. But we go to Marvel Stadium for North Melbourne versus Carlton. Carlton coming off the bye will be massive favourites. Coming off the bye can sometimes be a bit of a disadvantage for the team coming off the bye. But I think against North Melbourne, it's hard to suggest that will hurt Carlton too much. They only play once a year typically. Carlton have won the last couple. 2021 was the last time North Melbourne beat Carlton. Their first half, we'll look at North Melbourne first. Their first halves have been pretty solid. I think they're struggling to run out games completely. Their midfield's doing good. They've got a lot of good young talent that's getting a lot of the ball. They're converting when they're going forward is their main downfall so far through their first couple games. Carlton are just winning close games week in, week out. It's a bit like Collingwood 2 years ago and even last year a little bit, where they just get in close games and they win. They've been losing for big chunks of both games so far that they've played, and yet they've got the win, so that's all that they can do. Game number 3 is also on Good Friday over west at Optus Stadium. We have Fremantle hosting Adelaide. This will be at 7:30pm Australian Eastern Daylight Time, so a lot earlier in the afternoon over west. Freo will go into this as favourites. They have had a solid start to the year, obviously beating Brisbane in their round 1 game. They then got another one, good performance last week. Adelaide have been a bit disappointing so far, so they'll need to improve on what they've shown so far. The last 3 matches, Freo have won 2 out of the 3 against Adelaide, so probably the better of the recent rivalry at least. So far, Freo have been pretty slow starters, to be honest, in the first quarters, but they've just continued to grind out the games and getting the wins. Their forward efficiency is their main reason they're winning these games. They are getting beaten at inside 50s, but just converting when they go forward, which is very important in modern day football, to convert your opportunities, because that's what will win you matches. They're tackling well, which is probably causing a lot of pressure, which tends to help in the facet of trying to keep that pressure on and kicking goals and scoring well. Adelaide, terrible so far. To be honest, they could have got smacked by Gold Coast, but luckily turned it on in the last quarter and got themselves back into it. And then last week at home against Geelong, just were never really in the match. So they're 1-5 in for the first 3 quarters of matches. They do turn it on in the last quarter. They've won both last quarters so far, but they're leaving it too little too late. So yeah, that's where they're losing it at the moment. They are winning inside 50s, which will make this a interesting match in that they're winning inside 50s and not being efficient. Fremantle are losing inside 50s, but are being efficient. So it sets up that Fremantle should just take care of business. Whether they'll probably lose inside 50s and win the game by 30 points. Adelaide clearance work, midfield work has been solid, but as I said, they're just not using it when they go forward. Obviously, week 1 they were in the heavy rain, so you ignore that a little bit, but they just weren't good enough last week at Adelaide Oval. Game number 4 of round 3. We have Essendon versus St Kilda at Marvel Stadium. This is Saturday evening game at 4:20. Last year, Saints won both matches against the Bombers. Obviously, Max King and 2-metre Peter Wright are both out of this match, so a tall forward for both teams go out. Who that benefits the most? Probably neither. I don't think that it's a massive advantage for either with both of them going out. St Kilda playing a high disposal game. They were very good against Collingwood. They just got it done, which is what they're doing. Obviously just made finals last year. They're looking to try and improve. I don't know if they have yet. We'll wait and see. They should. They need to win this if they are going to push for finals, I think. Essendon were good last week against Sydney. If they bring that same game style, same skill level, I think they can be competitive here. But it's going to be interesting because they were obviously competitive. They've been good in the midfield. I want to see a good performance from them before we start tipping them in these matches, but they weren't too bad last week. Going into the Saturday night game, we head over to the Adelaide Oval for what I believe is a match of the round. 2 teams that have both been competitive so far. I think outside of the Sydney teams, these are probably the next best couple, really. Port Adelaide and Melbourne. Melbourne obviously lost week 1 up in Sydney, but since then have really turned it on, and Port Adelaide, having not played anyone yet, but getting the wins, Port Adelaide will be favourites, being that it's in Adelaide. These two teams played in Adelaide, I think it was late last year, and Port Adelaide just got over the line by like 4 points. I have memories of Grundy playing that one for Melbourne, so teams have changed a little bit since then. So far, Port Adelaide have only lost one quarter from their 8, so they're just dominating pretty much every category they're really, really good at. At least the important stat categories. They've had a basically perfect start to the year. Obviously, we haven't seen them playing against anyone of real note just yet. So we'll see what happens with that. Being that they beat West Coast at Adelaide Oval, they did travel to Melbourne to play Richmond last week. But I just think Richmond are a little bit off the elites. This game in Melbourne probably start favourite. Being in Adelaide, Port Adelaide will be starting favourites. Melbourne have been clean. They've obviously turned it around since their opening round loss. So I think it should be a pretty competitive game, and I would hope to see this one being a very tight contest. Game number 6 is Easter Sunday at 1 p.m. Marvel Stadium for what certainly doesn't shape as being the game of the round. We've got Western Bulldogs hosting West Coast. Bulldogs turned it around last week. They played 2 games. Obviously, round 1 they were terrible. Round 2 they were very good. So, yet to make a decision on what we're going to get from Bulldogs. I feel like we've got this similar sort of thing the last couple years from them, where their best is very good, their worst is very bad, and very, very hard to predict which one of them you'll see. They will go into this heavy favourites, obviously. Being in Melbourne, even if it wasn't in Melbourne, they would still be favourites, but it's hard to see West Coast being competitive. Having said that, the Eagles did beat the Bulldogs last year, so what we'll get, I don't know. West Coast have been getting smacked through most categories so far, and it's hard to see a world where they don't get smacked again. But stranger things have happened in football. We'll see what happens there on Sunday afternoon. The other Easter Sunday game is at the MCG in what will be an important game for both teams, Richmond versus Sydney. Sydney will be going into this favourites, pretty strong favourites for obvious reasons. They're undefeated, 3-0. Richmond, not so good, being 0-3. One of 2 teams that are 0-3 with Collingwood. Last year, they split the 2 games, so Richmond 1-1, Sydney 1-1, which leads you to think that maybe it will be closer than potentially we think, but at the same time, Sydney have been dominating. Richmond have been okay without being great. They obviously nearly stole the game against Carlton. They led a lot of that one. They played good football. They just couldn't quite get over the line. They had a lot of injuries as well that day. And then again, Port Adelaide last week, they were good, especially early. They just got overrun in the end by what is a better team. The main thing that Richmond probably need to improve is their forward efficiency. They just are not converting when they go forward. They're getting the ball forward enough. They're just not converting that. Sydney's game style is very dissimilar to most other teams. They play high pressure, but they also like to control the ball. They will kick it a lot. They'll mark it a lot. They'll just try and keep the pace to their pace. They don't mind going fast, but they will control it with kicks and ground position more than the run and handball style of other teams. Their mids have been unreal. Isaac Heaney's had 3 of the best games you'll see he's going to be very high in the Brownlow votes after 3 weeks. So, I think it's hard to go against Sydney, being that they are just in such good form. But Richmond probably not as bad as maybe I expected, and maybe some others after the first week. We then turn to the traditional Easter Monday game at the MCG. We'll be having Hawthorn hosting the Geelong Cats in what is a bit of an anticlimax to the week, because if Hawthorn perform like they did last week, this game will be over very early. Last year, Geelong absolutely smoked Hawthorn, and I expect that we'll probably be seeing very similar again. Hawthorn have been having slow starts, and they just haven't shown enough to want to back them or think that they have a chance. But they'll be needing to improve on what we've seen so far. Meanwhile, Geelong have won 2 games. One at the Cattery against St Kilda, which perhaps was slightly better than I gave them credit for initially. St Kilda, it'll be interesting to see how both those teams going forward. Whereas week 2 they went across to Adelaide Oval and beat the Crows, who have been a bit disappointing early, but it's still a tough road trip, and they got it done. I won't say comfortably, but they didn't control it. They won by 19 points, having lost the last quarter by 5, so they were 24 points up going into the last quarter. Geelong, I don't know what to say about them. Their 2 weeks could not be more contrasting. Yes, they've won them both, but week 1 they dominated inside 50s. They just couldn't convert. Week 2 was exactly the opposite. They got smacked in inside 50s and converted not very well, but just a lot better than their opposition. Their forward efficiency rates mid-pack, really, so it'll be interesting to see what happens with that going forward. They're getting beaten in clearances, in possession, contested possession. They're just getting the job done. They out-tackling the winning matches of football, and that's all you can do. And I think that will continue, being that they're playing against Hawthorn on Monday. So that's the 8 matches of the round. We've obviously got GWS and Gold Coast sitting out this week. So it'll be interesting for them to see how they come back after the break for Gather Round over in Adelaide. We'll have a look now at my tips for this weekend. There's the 8 matches on the screen. My record so far for this season, I think I went 2 in the first week, opening round, then I went 7, and then I went 5, so 12, 14. 14 is what I'm on from 21 games. So not the best start, but we'll turn that around, hopefully, going forward. It looks an easy week on paper. Whether it is or not, I don't know. AFL has a funny way of throwing weird things happening, but we'll see what happens. It's hard to see Brisbane losing to Collingwood. Collingwood just aren't quite at the level they need to be at the moment, so I have Brisbane by 31. Being at the Gabba, Brisbane obviously lost opening round against Carlton at the Gabba, but you take out that result and they just don't lose there. So I said this in the opening round, but you just can't bet against them there. Week off, they'll be ready to go. North Melbourne, Carlton by 47. It's at Marvel, doesn't favour either team. North Melbourne their young team is good. I just don't think they're quite up to this. Possibly be a little closer than that. I could see North Melbourne only losing by 4 goals, but they'll need Carlton to probably come in a little flat, which is possible coming off the bye. Fremantle, Adelaide, over in Freo, they get the job done. I can't see them smashing them. Freo just don't really play a game style that smashes teams. but I think we'll see them winning by somewhere between around 3 goals to 5 goals. Essendon St Kilda, big game for both teams. Essendon will want to prove that their performance against Sydney wasn't a fluke. St Kilda 2-0. This is a chance to go 1-1. Chance to go 2-1, and be very competitive. This early in the season would be big for them. I have the Saints by 20. Port Adelaide Melbourne. I think this, as I said before, is the game of the round. Whether it turns out that way, I don't know, but I think it's also the hardest to tip. I'm going with the favourites, Port Adelaide. It's hard to go against them at the moment. We haven't seen them play against anyone, but they also have not done anything wrong, whereas Melbourne had the one tough match against Sydney and did go down in that. So based on that, I am going with Port Adelaide in a tight one. Western Bulldogs hosting West Coast on Sunday. You would have to be on a different planet to tip West Coast in this one, I think. I'm not saying West Coast can't win. I'm just saying it would be a wild tip to tip West Coast. I have the Doggies by 61. Richmond Sydney. I think Richmond are probably better than I and a few others have given credit, but I still can't see Sydney losing this based on what they've done. Isaac Heaney is flying. If he continues that, Sydney win by 30. And then on Monday, I have Geelong winning by 45 over Hawthorn. I just don't think Hawthorn are at the same level as Geelong. So that's how I have round 3 playing out. Going forward, we have next week's episodes will be Easter Monday after the Hawthorn Geelong game. I will be posting the round 3 review. That should be up by Monday afternoon. We'll do the normal stuff where I go through awards, my awards. We'll run through all the matches, and we'll also have a look at how my tips went. Hopefully those matches over this side, even this side, will be looking a lot better compared to how I went last week. And then once again, Wednesday night / Thursday morning, the round 4 preview will be coming out. Next week is Gather Round, which is in Adelaide. All 18 teams playing over in South Australia. It was a big success for the AFL last year. I'd like to see them take it elsewhere outside of just football heartland in Adelaide. They want to expand their game, and they do it with stupid opening round. But anyway, that's a story for another day. This has been All Aussie Rules. Find me on Twitter. Find me on Instagram. The podcast goes out on YouTube and Spotify. Hopefully it will go out on a few more platforms over the coming weeks. I'm looking at bringing in some new things as well with intro videos and a bunch of other stuff. But don't forget to like and subscribe, comment what you like, what you don't like. Give me your thoughts on your favourite team. If you agree with me on something, if you disagree, let me know. Thanks for listening. Catch us on the next one.